One of the jurors in the George Zimmerman trial, known as Juror B37, spoke to CNN's Anderson Cooper earlier this week. She sparked outrage on social media with her comments on the role of race in the trial and how she seemed to instinctively trust George Zimmerman over Trayvon Martin.
I think George Zimmerman is a man whose heart was in the right place, but just got displaced by the vandalism in the neighborhoods and wanting to catch these people so badly that he went above and beyond what he really should have done. But I think his heart was in the right place. It just went terribly wrong.
Juror B37 had already signed with a literary agent for a book about her experience on the jury. But after the outcry on Twitter, particularly outcry generated by one Twitter user who posted the agent's phone number and email address and encouraged followers to voice their objection, the agent rescinded her offer. The incident spoke to the power of social media and the power of one person, one really motivated person. That person, Twitter organizer Genie Lauren, joins the table. Genie, so you had a win this week, right? We said, okay, we had all these losses. Do we see any wins? You had a win. What prompted you to organize on Twitter in this way?
Well, I saw people live tweeting the CNN interview, and when I learned about her having, the book deal the Sunday Sunday right after the verdict came down. And it was like, why so soon? You know, seems like maybe a little opportunistic. And then with the CNN interview, it just made me so upset. And it was like, what can we do? And someone tweeted me and said, we can stop this book. And I was like, yeah, we can't change the verdict. We can't bring Trayvon back, but we can definitely stop this book.
So let me ask you something. So my first impulse, because I am troubled by the verdict, because I like Twitter, my first impulse is to just say yay, right? My second impulse, particularly as someone who's on television, who says things that are polarizing, is, do I want social media to be able to take people down, right? Do I want in 140 characters, folks to say, I want Melissa Harris Perry off the air because I don't agree with her. Talk to me about how we balance the sort of First Amendment free speech rights that you have and that she has, and like the ability and need to protest and to make our voices heard.
That's a tough question, but I think that...
Solve it right now, 35 seconds.
Well, wow, that is a really tough question. I think it goes hand in hand with when people protest, this is just another way for people to protest. So obviously, as you were saying earlier, a lot of protests fail. A lot of protests fail in the immediate sense, but in the long run, they do prevail. But for right now, on Twitter, people are just voicing their concerns the same way they would take to the streets. And it's just a different form of protest.
David, let me get you in on this one.
Look, Twitter is the wild, wild west of cyberspace, and it has its good and its bad.
Sure.
You can say whatever you want in 140 characters, even anonymously.
And then you can say whatever you want in 140 characters.
So I attach responsibility to the person who does it and the person who puts it out. I'm for using Twitter. I'm for using social media. It was one of the big reasons the Tea Party movement took off. Even here in New York, tens of thousands of people on the streets responsibly. If you put out, for instance, in what you did, the company number, not the personal number of the person, that's a responsible use of Twitter to say, voice your opinion.
Right, you didn't ask vigilantes to go to her house.
Right. Which, for instance, there's a report of a woman in Florida getting over 100 calls and death threats because her number's one number off from Zimmerman, and that was something that was put out there about the cell phone use. So we have to use it, and I applaud you using it responsibly. What goes on after that is what the end user does with it, and that's what we do. Look, you and I get vile hatred from all areas on this for different reasons. That's an irresponsible use of it, and frankly, it doesn't affect us because it shouldn't. But responsible use of it, I think, is good. I think your example of the revolution is it didn't bring down the regime, and obviously the regime's still there, but it did bring the world to notice what the Green Revolution was about. So that's its function.
And Jeannie, let me ask you that. So this was one case where you had a very clear goal, you organized people and you met that goal. Going forward, do you see Twitter as a valuable way to build sort of longer-term social movements? And not just Twitter, but social media in general?
I think especially because it gives people access to stuff they might have felt like they didn't have access to before. I mean, you know, there are protests in New York, there are protests in Miami, but if you live somewhere where maybe there's no protest, what do? You can take to Twitter, and you can take to Twitter on your phone. You don't even have to have a laptop.
Yeah, well, one of the things that I can definitely say that Twitter has done is that it brought you to my attention. And so if it did nothing else, it sometimes makes connections across people who would never otherwise connect. So thank you for your work. I'm going to let you in right after the commercial. I promise I'm bringing the rest of the panel back, because when we come back, I want to talk about the struggle that continues in the place that y'all know I have been yelling about for months. North Carolina is raising up. We're going back there when we come back.